While the world looked east and west, a quiet transformation was happening in the south. Not just another emerging market, not just growth statistics, but a demographic, digital, and resource wave so big it might reshape global power entirely. This is Africa, and for decades no one was ready, until now. When you hear superpower, you likely picture Washington, Moscow, or Beijing. What you don't picture yet? A continent. Africa, 54 nations, 1.5 billion people as of 2024. But here's the kicker. While other regions are aging, Africa's workforce is about to explode. That alone gives Africa something most superpowers don't have anymore: time, scale, agility. Yet, with that promise come deep structural challenges: infrastructure gaps, governance issues, debt, and climate risk. So the question isn't if Africa can rise, it's when, how fast, and whether the rest of the world is prepared. Because while the West was busy arguing about decline and Asia was consolidating power, Africa was quietly rewriting the global equation. Today, Africa is home to the world's youngest population, the fastest growing middle class, and the most dynamic mobile economy on the planet. By 2050, its population will almost equal China and India combined. And yet, nobody seems ready for what's coming next. This is the untold story of how Africa is building its own digital empires, powering cities with the sun, and leading a new generation that refuses to be defined by the past. This is not charity. This is strategy. The truth is simple. Africa is not waiting for permission. It's scaling faster, digitizing faster, and urbanizing faster than any region on the planet. The only question left is, will the world recognize it before it's too late? For over 400 years, the world's power centers have rotated between continents, from Europe's colonial empires to America's post-war dominance to Asia's manufacturing miracle. But if you track the data quietly, population trends, urban expansion, digital penetration, and energy transitions, a new center is emerging. The next gravitational pull of growth isn't Washington, Beijing, or Brussels. It is Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Addis Ababa, the cities forming the new super network of the Global South. According to the African Development Bank, Africa's urban population is growing faster than any other region, adding nearly 90 million new residents every 5 years, equivalent to adding a city the size of London every 6 months. And those cities are becoming data-driven economies, not just industrial ones. Africa's median age is 19, compared to 38 in the US, 43 in Europe, and 48 in Japan. By 2050, the UN projects that 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African, about 2.5 billion citizens. That's not just growth, it's destiny. As Europe and Asia age out of productivity, Africa will be the only region with a growing workforce, according to the United Nations Population Division, UNPD. By the 2030s, the continent will supply almost equivalent workers to China and India combined. A seismic demographic shift unseen since the Industrial Revolution. However, the youth can be both a dividend and a danger. Without jobs, education, and opportunity, that energy can destabilize rather than drive progress. So this is Africa's fork in the road: demographic power versus demographic pressure. According to the 2025 IMF World Economic Outlook, sub-Saharan Africa is projected to grow at 4.4% annually between 2026 and 2029, outpacing Latin America, the Eurozone, and even parts of Asia. 6 of the world's 10 fastest-growing economies this decade are African: Niger, Senegal, Côte d'Ivoire, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. Yet Africa still contributes less than 3% of global GDP, underscoring a paradox: vast momentum, limited impact. But that may be exactly how all superpowers begin: fast-growing but undercounted. It is the same stage China was in the early 1990s. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, the largest trade bloc since the WTO, now links 1.3 billion consumers and a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion, with the potential to lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty, according to World Bank 2024 data. If fully implemented, the World Bank estimates intra-African trade could grow by 81% by 2035. Africa's lack of legacy infrastructure isn't a weakness, it's an opportunity to leapfrog. Take fintech. In Kenya, M-Pesa pioneered mobile payments in 2007, long before Apple Pay existed. Today, over 70% of all adults in Kenya use mobile money. In Nigeria, the fintech sector grew by over 200% between 2019 and 2023, attracting billions in global venture capital. The GSMA Mobile Economy Report predicts Africa will reach 1 billion mobile connections by 2026, with smartphone adoption surpassing 75%. This means digital infrastructure will define the continent's modernization. In short, Africa is skipping landlines, skipping paper banking, skipping cable TV, going straight to mobile, AI, and blockchain. The result: a younger, digitally native continent whose infrastructure isn't built on the past, but the cloud. Africa holds over 30% of the world's mineral reserves, including 70% of cobalt, 40% of manganese, and over 60% of global platinum, all critical for batteries, EVs, and renewable energy. In the race for green energy, this makes Africa indispensable. The Democratic Republic of Congo supplies more than 2/3 of global cobalt, while Namibia and Zimbabwe are rising as lithium powerhouses. This isn't just resource luck, it's leverage. And with China, the EU, and the US racing to secure supply chains, Africa has bargaining power unseen since the oil boom of the 1970s. But potential alone doesn't build power. Africa still faces deep structural issues. Debt distress. Over 22 countries classified by the IMF as high risk of debt distress. Infrastructure deficit. The African Development Bank estimates a $100 billion annual shortfall in roads, power, and digital networks. Governance challenges. From coup resurgences in West Africa to corruption that drains over $80 billion a year. Climate vulnerabilities. The continent contributes less than 4% of global emissions but suffers the worst effects of drought, floods, and crop loss. So while the world headlines Africa's rise, the real story is this. Africa is preparing for power, but the world isn't prepared for an Africa with power.
For decades, Africa was spoken of in future tense, the next frontier. But that phrase is quietly expiring. From trade corridors to AI labs, from fintech startups to satellite launches, Africa is moving. This is no longer a question of if Africa will rise. It's about how strategically it's doing it. According to the IMF's 2025 Regional Economic Outlook, over 30 African countries are implementing structural reforms, from fiscal digitization to sovereign wealth funds, to reclaim financial independence from foreign lenders. The narrative is shifting. From aid dependency to partnership equity. Enter the African Continental Free Trade Area, arguably the most ambitious integration project since the European Union. Launched in 2021, it now includes 54 nations, linking 1.3 billion people and an economy of $3.4 trillion. By 2035, it could boost Africa's exports by 29%, increase wages by 9.8%, and lift 30 million people out of extreme poverty, according to the World Bank. Already, logistics giants are investing in intra-African trade infrastructure, from Kenya's Lapset corridor to Nigeria's Lekki deep-sea port. That's how empires start, with integration. If the 20th century's Pan-African dream was political, the 21st century's version is digital. Across the continent, governments and startups are connecting markets that colonial borders once divided. In Rwanda, AI is being integrated into national healthcare. In Ghana, digital ID systems now link over 85% of citizens, and in Kenya, nearly all government payments are being moved online. The Smart Africa Alliance, backed by the African Union, now includes 40 member states, aiming to create a single digital market. a unified framework for e-commerce, cybersecurity, and data sovereignty by 2030. That's a digital union of over 1 billion users, a scale comparable only to the European Union's data zone. Africa's industrial revolution won't be built on coal, it'll be powered by the sun. The International Renewable Energy Agency reports that Africa has 60% of the world's best solar resources yet less than 2% of installed capacity, a gap now closing fast. Egypt's Benban Solar Park, Morocco's Noor Complex, and Kenya's Lake Turkana wind farm are redefining Africa's energy landscape. And with the Just Energy Transition partnerships worth over $11.6 billion in South Africa alone, Africa's now monetizing carbon fairness, not just raw materials. The result, industrial zones powered by renewables, not diesel. A first in modern development history. The real shift, though, isn't only economic, it's financial and digital sovereignty. Central banks in Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa are testing central bank digital currencies. Meanwhile, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, backed by Afrexim Bank, is enabling real-time cross-border transactions in local currencies, cutting out the US dollar as a middleman. This isn't theory. It's already operational in 9 pilot countries, and if scaled, PAPS could save African businesses over $5 billion a year in transaction costs. It's a quiet revolution, monetary autonomy disguised as innovation. You won't see that on CNN, you won't hear it on CNBC, but the indicators are there, beneath the noise. Trade integration, digital sovereignty, energy independence, demographic momentum. Africa isn't emerging, it's converging into something the world hasn't modeled yet. A decentralized, digitally connected, resource-rich, youthful, and climate-adaptive superpower in the making. This is the shift, the one nobody was ready for. For centuries, global power flowed in one direction, north to south. Raw materials went up, manufactured goods came down. But as Africa digitizes, industrializes, and unifies, that current is reversing. The Brookings Institution projects that by 2035, Africa's combined consumer and business spending will approach $7 trillion, nearly double what it was in 2015. That would make Africa the world's 3rd largest consumer market, behind only the US and China. The implication? Global supply chains, investment flows, and tech ecosystems are quietly rewiring to serve African demand, not just extract African supply. For Western powers, this isn't a charity story anymore, it's a competition story. As Africa's influence rises, the old development model, loans, lectures, and leverage, stops working. The European Investment Bank has already expanded its use of equity financing. Guarantees, as part of a more diversified strategy, the US launched the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment to counter China's Belt and Road. Meanwhile, China has quietly doubled down on resource for infrastructure swaps, with nations like Zambia and Angola writing off billions in debt for mining access. For Washington and Brussels, the implication is clear. Engage Africa as equals, or risk watching Beijing, and increasingly, Delhi and Riyadh take the lead. China built its modern economy on low-cost manufacturing and Western demand. Africa could do the same, but with a digital twist. Already, Chinese firms control over 40% of Africa's critical infrastructure projects, from rail to telecoms. Yet the relationship is evolving. African states are no longer just clients, they're negotiating as shareholders. The Belt and Road is becoming a two-way road. Silicon Valley once saw Africa as an expansion market. Now, it's a design lab. Google's Equiano cable, connecting Portugal to South Africa, has increased regional internet speeds by over 20%, and Africa-born startups like Flutterwave, Andela, and Wasoko are exporting talent, not just importing capital. We call this reverse innovation, where African solutions scale globally before Western equivalents even exist. Think M-Pesa before PayPal Mobile. Think e-agriculture before precision farming became a buzzword. For Africa, here's the paradox. Growth does not erase vulnerability, it amplifies it, because with visibility comes expectation, and with power comes pressure. By 2030, Africa's population will hit 1.8 billion. That's an additional 350 million jobs that need to be created. If industrialization lags, social unrest could follow, especially as climate stress worsens food and water scarcity. So the question for African leaders is, no longer can we grow. It is, can we govern growth fast enough to sustain it? Africa is warming faster than the global average, and it's already costing lives and GDP. The United Nations Environment Program estimates that climate shocks are reducing agricultural yields by 5–15% annually in East Africa. Yet, paradoxically, the continent holds 40% of the world's renewable energy potential. This makes Africa both victim and victor in the climate era, the front line of climate disaster and the frontier of climate solutions. Energy diplomacy will define its next phase. Expect the rise of green alliances with nations like Kenya, Morocco, and South Africa exporting clean power, not raw minerals. The superpower of the next era may not be who drills the most, but who harnesses the most sun. Power isn't just GDP, it's narrative, and Africa is reclaiming its global story. From Afrobeats to Nollywood, from fashion to film, Africa's soft power is exploding. Netflix and Disney are investing directly in local content studios. For the first time in modern history, global audiences are not consuming African stereotypes, they're consuming African exports, and cultural capital always precedes economic capital. So, what happens when the youngest, most connected, most resource-rich continent in the world starts believing in itself? The world's economic maps will redraw, trade routes will tilt, innovation patterns will shift, and geopolitics will adjust. Reports predict that Africa will house half of the world's fastest-growing cities, from Lusaka to Dar es Salaam, Dakar to Accra. And the International Telecommunication Union reports that internet use in Africa is growing twice as fast as the global average. However, behind this rapid growth lies a patchwork of inequality that still leaves almost 50% of the continent offline. It is predicted that by 2050, Africa's digital economy will reach $712 billion, powered by e-commerce, AI, and green tech. When that happens, Africa will be home to the world's largest untapped labor force and the youngest consumer base. Global supply chains are already pivoting. Companies like Volkswagen, Hyundai, and Foxconn have quietly expanded manufacturing in Ethiopia, Ghana, and South Africa. As Asia's labor costs rise and Europe's population ages, Africa becomes the factory floor and innovation lab of the world, simultaneously. That's not a dream. That's economics. They said Africa was too young, too chaotic, too poor, but youth became energy, chaos became innovation, poverty became reinvention. While the world argued over the old order, Africa started building the new one, digital, green, and uncolonized. And when the maps are redrawn, power will no longer be measured by who rules the seas or skies, but who connects the world. And in that world, Africa won't just be on the map. Africa will be the map.